let's talk about 5.6 pest control methods. First thing we need to talk about is integrated pest management, also known as IPM. IPM is pretty famous. Essentially, the IPM wants to minimize pesticide inputs, or the amount of pesticide that we use, because it's not good for us. And so here's how IPM does it. First is crop rotation. Second, intercropping. Third, pest-resistant crop varieties. Four, creating habitats for predators of pests. Let me explain this a little more. So let's say the indigo bird, I don't know if that exists, eats the fire ant. They're going to create a nest for indigo birds, bring them in so that they eat all the fire ants. And a limited use of pesticides, of course. They want to minimize that. And we've gone over what most of these vocab words mean in this review. Feel free to just Google anything that you don't think is familiar, or just comment down below and I'll answer you pretty speedily. Organic agriculture. So what does organic agriculture mean? Essentially, it's the production of crops without the use of synthetic pesticides or fertilizers. What does that mean? You just make crops and you don't use pesticides or fertilizers. That's simple. All right, now let's move on to 5.7. The first thing we're going to be talking about is CAFO, concentrated animal feeding operations. This one is actually pretty sad. Essentially, imagine one building where a bunch of animals are just grouped together. They barely have any leg room. They're crowded almost on top of one another. They don't have any room to, poop separately or anything like that. It's really tight knit. It's pretty gross. It's kind of inhuman to treat animals that way, but it is used. And so animals are fenced together really tightly in small spaces using CAFO, concentrated animal feeding operations. And in that way, technically, let's talk about the pros. They provide jobs. So people are looking after these animals, and they're low prices. CAFO farming produces low prices. And so you'll be able to buy poultry, pork, lamb, beef for low prices. And there are many types of animals that can easily be handled in that way. But what are the cons? Well, pollutants can contaminate the surface and groundwater supplies really quickly. So think about this, as soon as one pollutant enters the cage or the concentrated animal feeding box, well, then everyone gets contaminated there, every single animal, because they're in such a tight space. Another problem is just going to be it's so expensive and there's waste everywhere. It's not cleaned up. It's a mess. And personally, for me, the biggest problem is just imagine a bunch of little animals just being cooped up together without barely any leg room. It's really sad. Okay, and now let's talk about a more happy type of method to manage animals. So there are also free range animals, where animals have access to pastures all the time. Essentially, imagine like a wide open green lawn where the owners are like, everyone, animals, just do your thing, go wherever. And they provide them with lush green grass and some food, and the animals just graze. They're happy, they walk, they're healthy. And so generally the pro of that is that it's very great to have animals live that type of life, but also humans who eat those animals are going to be healthier because there's less of the waste contamination that was there in the CAFO. Now let's talk about the last vocab word I have here, and that's overgrazing. So overgrazing is a problem that can sometimes happen with free range animals. And basically, imagine a cow just eating all the grass in a field. Essentially, it's whenever the animals eat too much of the crops present, and it leads to desertification, especially in dry areas with low precipitation and moisture. So basically, desertification, as a reminder, is when a place with a lot of lush green vegetation turns into almost like a dry land desert because there's been a bunch of erosion, the nutrients are all gone, plants can't grow there anymore, it's practically desert like. We want to avoid that. And so overgrazing is bad, and we want to help farmers prevent overgrazing and take care of their animals. 5.8. So there's a couple of vocab words that you're just going to have to know. First one, bycatch. Bycatch, what's that? Essentially, it's non-target organisms that are caught. So let's say you were fishing for a dolphin. I don't know why you do that, but you're fishing for a dolphin and instead you got a shark. That was bycatch. You didn't mean to, you weren't looking for a shark, but you caught one. Bycatch essentially is really bad for the environment because what ends up happening is whenever people are fishing, a lot of the organisms they actually catch, they don't need, but then they keep because even though they're not the target, and the fish populations and the underwater populations see a rapid decline because everyone is catching even the like fish that they're not trying to get. And so that leads to a fishery collapse. What is a fishery collapse? It is when the population of fish declines by 90% or more. We actually had a global fishery collapse a few years ago. Yes, the fish population declined by 90% or more. That is scary, really scary. And a large part of that is bycatch. We don't mean to catch the shark, but we caught the shark and the dolphin, and now we have both. And now they're both dead, unfortunately. Sometimes this study video gets depressing, but I promise it'll be okay. And another vocab word, this is pretty self-explanatory, ocean pollution, damage to the seafloor and reefs. That happens whenever we see a fishery collapse because the ecosystem is no longer functioning as it should be. How do we fix this? Well, laws and regulations, monitoring our people, only catching what they're supposed to catch, things like that. A key term here is aquaculture. So what that means is fish farming in high density. It's a way for people to fish farm. Imagine like the CAFO method again, the CAFO method, except with fish. You have a bunch of fish tanks, and again, there's a high density of fish. There's a bunch of fish. There's millions of fish in this fish tank that you have. I don't know how the logistics would play out, but you have millions. Well, what are the pros of that aquaculture, the fish farm, where you have a bunch of fish in a small tank? Well, it's cost effective because only a small area is used, but the negative is once again disease spread and waste contamination happens like that because there's so many fish in just one tank. The last term for 5.1 is going to be individual transferable quotas, also known as ITQ. ITQ, individual transferable quotas. This is the total allowable catch quota. So let's say someone tells me, hey, Ramya, you're allowed to catch 50 fish in this week. That's my ITQ. If I go past that, I probably have to pay a fine or something bad will happen in terms of law enforcement. That is the amount of fish I'm allowed to catch. The easiest way for me to remember is to just quota. The word quota makes it easy to understand what it is. It's the amount of fish that you can or cannot catch. Now we're going to talk about 5.9. A bunch of vocab words coming your way, so be prepared. You can do this. All right, so we're talking about mining. Here's a couple of vocab words you just need to know. What is ore? Ore is the rock that contains profitable materials. So I give you this ore, you give me $50, something like that. What are reserves? That is soil that we can mine from, soil reserves. What are spoils? It is waste created by mining. What are tailings? That's also waste created by mining. What are the impacts of mining? A quick overview. Erosion happens. There's a disruption of landed habitat, tailings, which is waste, which leads to environmental harm, and potential sediments and water. Now think about the different types of mining. There are a couple we're going to be talking about. There's going to be strip mining, open pit mining, mountaintop removal, placer mining, and subsurface mining. We're just going to briefly talk about each of those. What is mountaintop removal mining? Well, it's exactly what it is. You remove the mountaintop with explosives. You literally throw bombs and you remove the mountain and then you mine. For example, we do this with coal. Next, what is placer mining? Placer mining is looking for metals in river sediments. We saw this with like the California gold rush. So think about people taking up their pans, putting it in the water, and trying to find gold. That's exactly what placer mining is. So think California 49ers. Lastly, we have subsurface mining. That's below or lower into the earth. And usually horizontal tunnels are drilled for subsurface mining. And it can be pretty dangerous because whenever you go down there, you might be risking your life. Okay, 5.10 impacts of urbanization. Let's talk about fossil fuels. You probably know what they are by this point, but they increase the ecological footprint. And what is the impact of converting land to agriculture? What happens then? Well, erosion, soil degradation, habitat loss, and an increase in CO2. What that means is that as we plant more, as we use more land, as we urbanize more, we're increasing our ecological footprint and we are hurting our environment, which we've established humans do pretty early on in AP environmental science. So, a couple of terms that you probably already know is first yield. What is yield? The productivity of the land. So if the yield was 5 corns per meter versus 10 corns per meter, the more efficient one would be the 10 corns per meter, but both of them would be the yield, how much corn was yielded or made in that area. How do we increase yield from that 5 to 10? Well, fertilization, irrigation, we talked about the Green Revolution and its impacts, that really helped, and extending the time each year that land is under cultivation, as well as rotating among different crops. Kind of like intercropping, crop rotation, these all help. These are sustainable ways to conduct farming. What are the effects of increased yield, of having more efficiency? Maybe instead of 10 corn per meter, now we have 100 corns yield per meter. Well, soil degradation and water pollution, that is the impact of a higher yield. Yes, you have made more money by selling this corn, potentially fed more people, but you've also hurt the environment in terms of water pollution and soil degradation. So, unfortunately, the takeaway here is that the impact of urbanization, not so great. Increasing fossil fuels, increasing ecological footprint, increasing CO2 emissions, and with clear cutting, where we cut down the trees and decrease oxygen, we increase global warming and climate change. On that happy note, let's move on to 5.11. I swear, guys, this just becomes an existential crisis every time we talk about environment in AP environmental science. All right, these two are going to be super quick, so bear with me. 5.11 is the ecological footprint. What is an ecological footprint? We just mentioned it, but it measures how much nature it takes to support human beings and or an economy. So in class, we took this fun quiz where it was like, if everyone else on Earth had your lifestyle, we would need this many Earths to keep running. And for me, it was like 4.2. If everyone else had the lifestyle that I lead, apparently we'd need 4.2 Earths to keep running, and at a certain point, we'd run out. So that was concerning. And something to make note of is I live in the US, and the average American has a much higher ecological footprint compared to many other countries. And especially if you compare it to a developing country, the average person is not going to have a huge ecological footprint, and their lifestyle is technically more sustainable. Whereas here in the US, 4.2 Earths. So that is a constant battle that we have. How can we figure out how we can either lower our ecological footprint, increase efficiency, and just figure this out so that we don't run out of resources? That's the whole point of this unit in sustainable agriculture and renewable resources. Now, let's just review the concept of sustainable yield. So, it was the amount of food that can be harvested without a lower or reduced food supply. As we remember earlier in the video, I kind of talked about this idea of replenishment. Let's say that there's 4 churros on the plate. If I take 2 now, in 2 months, another 2 churros will appear and that will have been replenished. But and that is a sustainable yield. But if I take 3 churros, then in 2 months, only 2 more will appear. So there will only be 3 churros left on that plate, which means that the churros have not been replenished fully, which is bad because at a certain point they'll run out. Except this is going to be applied with fresh water and with really important resources that we use every day. Lastly, that brings us to 5.12, Intro to Sustainability. So, what is environmental sustainability? The very concept we've been talking about this entire time. Essentially, humans using natural resources to ensure that they're available for future generations. Why are we doing this? Why are we talking about sustainability? So that in the future that we won't run out of resources, because that is an actual risk. What are factors that affect sustainability or increase sustainability? Biodiversity. The more biodiverse species are, the better, especially for sustainability. Human population levels. So, generally speaking, the higher the human population, the lower the sustainability because there's more of a population to feed, they have a higher ecological footprint. So let's really hope that the population slows down and stops or maybe declines. Resource consumption. The fewer resources you consume and deplete, the more sustainable it is. Greenhouse gas concentration and food production. Yo, that was it. It is almost 1 a.m. It's 12:59 a.m. for me. So please tell me if you like this video, if this was helpful to you at all. Give me feedback in the comments, really, y'all. I want to know how I can help you better. And bye.